Okay, here's a few software things that can help you to get your project finished. We'll talk about tuning up the speed in Premiere, both in terms of adding time and speeding up some clips. We'll talk a little bit about music mixing and sound effects placement, in particular using cutting and transitions to make multiple pieces of music turn into a single piece of music, basically music editing. We'll talk about Photoshop hold frames and video groups, and then a little bit on After Effects as we add rain and snow to an animatic. So as I mentioned before, I'm not a huge fan of the position keyframes in here. Let's say we've got a situation like this one where we've got our line on one layer and our fill on another. It's probably just a good idea to combine those so they'll be animating together with no hassle. You might do that last. I found myself taking those clips and recycling them by, erasing out the fill and changing the head position and redoing the fill where necessary. So if it's melded together into a single layer, that kind of editing becomes more difficult. But classically, our position keyframes, we can start at one point, bring up our move tool, move them to the next point, automatically creating some movement. But let's say we've got something a little bit more complicated here, where he's got to stop for a bit and then continue. You can't really copy and paste keyframes, so what you'll want to do is turn this into what's called a hold keyframe. And what will happen is it'll hold in that position until it's told to do something else. So here we go. And then it leaps forward. So let's see what happens if we get rid of that. Create a new keyframe and then slide him into the new position. Let's see. Yeah, so he comes in, pauses, maybe says his line, and then apparently runs out the door. So there's a number of ways you can handle that. Again, rather limited in terms of the type of interpolation in here. Linear means it's going between those two keyframe values at full speed from A to B, and you can change the speed by changing the distance between the keyframes. In the case of a hold keyframe, it gives a command, and that command is held until it is rescinded by a new keyframe being introduced. Let's talk about groups versus video groups. Now you can see here that I've got a video timeline, classical, and we've got what is, by some standards, a very long pile of layers. I've grouped them together by shot, so they can be smaller, they can be sort of organized within that. And once you have them in a folder, a group, you can twirl that group up and no longer see them as a big long list. And this is typically how things like After Effects deal with left to right, beginning to end time in a linear timeline like this. What I've seen a few people do is end up with something where they're actually butted up against each other. And see if I can cause that to happen. See, I can't even do that. It won't do it because they're currently in groups, but it can do it if you're working with the layers themselves. Let me zoom in a little bit. Let's say I want to duplicate my backgrounds for this. I can select them all. I can hit Command J to duplicate them. Now I've got them all as a separate piece. Okay, so there's my triple header of new material. I can grab it, I can drag it, but notice how it wants to go behind a clip here. I have to be really careful to get it up into its own new space there, and now it's sort of separate from those. As I push it downstream, as it's going and adding time there, I technically have what could be a new shot here. If you do it wrong, you might end up doing something like this, and now I've got what's called a video group. You can say that an advantage of this version is that changes to the duration of shots ripple as they go through. What you can't control, though, is these have to be flattened. As soon as I want to try and do layered things again, I can't do it. So if you're working with stills that are not layered, this is a really viable way to do it. And if you're working with layers because you want to be able to recycle things, this doesn't work. Now, if you accidentally get them into video groups and you want to take them out, try grabbing them not in the timeline, but in the layer window, and just pull it loose from that video group. Delete the video group when you're back in business. These things can be relayered again and turned into the kind of classic layered document that you had before. Mine are totally backwards, but That's manageable. If you haven't grouped things before, this is how we might do that. I'm going to get rid of my bad ones. Yeah, because that's my flattened copy. So I can just shorten these to match my foreground. And then it looks like all of these are all part of a group. So I can either select them right here or select them right in the timeline and then just hit the group, create a new group icon, and then just, I like to name it with the shot number. So now I've got my shots, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if I expand them, yeah, it's a lot of layers. But if I keep them in, a sequence is pretty manageable. So I'm only doing like maybe 30 seconds per file, then using Premiere to kind of combine them. And the nice thing about that is if I need to make a change, rippling in 30 seconds is a little easier than rippling in 1 minute and 30, where suddenly everything is way off on the far right in the timeline, and creating ripple effects like that can be a big mess of having to pick up a lot of things and move it. Still picking up a lot of things, but maybe not quite as many. Okay, we'll use this opportunity to look at a couple of things in Premiere. Let's take an example of retiming some animatics here. I'm using the regular plus and minus keys to zoom in there too. You can obviously zoom in here as well. It's a little harder to control, but minus, plus. Okay, so here's the part where it cuts to Saul coming in. Saul, last chance, old man. Are you going to put out the film? Okay, so I just want to hold on that last pose a little bit. This is a classic sort of situation where maybe we just don't have enough frames. I think I'd probably go back and have him do some more acting, but let's just say I'm running out of time and need to create what's called a hold frame. I'll zoom in here, go to the end, and if you right-click on it, you can say Add Frame Hold, and you can see that it's just given me basically another little clip there. That clip is a still, and I can stretch that out as long as I want it. So now that's Saul, last chance, old man. Are you going to put out the film? And maybe to make that go a little bit better, I'll also take out a little dead space in that audio. Old man, are you going to put out the film? And then the whole thing's a little shorter. Are you going to put out the film? Okay, let's talk about speeding something up. Because sometimes you say, well, that seems like it's too slow. Like that shot right there could stand to be about twice as short. And in so doing, I'll make it twice as fast too. So right-click on it again, speed and duration. Here's the trick. In Premiere, 50% means it's going half the speed, so it will be going slower. 100% is obviously the same speed. 200% is double the speed. Let's just try a double speed on that one. Take out space. You can click on this empty spot here and just hit the delete key. That's kind of handy. And that looks way better that way. Let's do the opposite. Let's say we need to slow something down. I don't think this is wrong, but let's pretend it is. Let's pretend we want to drag out that crash of him coming out. So I'm going to put a split in here. I just brought up the C for cut tool, and there it is on my little split. And I think I'll keep that part the same. All right, using my A for arrows tool here, I'll use that. And you can see it does a double arrow. Grabs everything to the right. So I can make a big space here. Switch back to my move tool, V for move. And so this is going to stay 100%. I'll move that out of the way because if I'm going to slow this down, speed duration, sorry, it keeps going to the other monitor, 50%. Okay, now it's twice as long. And actually that looks pretty good. I think I'd probably just even put that there. Let's see. Yeah, actually that's not a bad choice. Delete that, and we're back in business. All right, let's take this opportunity to deal with some sound effects cutting, which might be something that you need to do. I've collected a few things here, but I've taken out my, honey, you made the right choice, sound of my car here. So we've got an idle. Let's see what that sounds like. It's pretty good. I'm going to take it from this presumably slightly quieter part here. And if I grab this handle, I can drag it down. And I'm guessing it's going to be too loud. Most sound effects are mixed to be making them prominent, making them the first thing you... Honey, you made the right choice. So I want to bring that whole thing down. I'm going to try like minus 18 dB or so. This here is an express train ticket to big picture stardom. It can be even more. If you find it sticking a little bit, you can also click on it and then hold down the control key, which makes it go slower. So let's try something like 14. Honey, you made the right choice. Yeah, it's a little more prominent. Now there's a bit here where they kind of drive away. So I'm going to see if there's one of these drive-bys is good for this. Let's try that. So this is the frame in which it happens. Let's find it. Okay. So I want to line it up, and then I'll drop it and I'll write it over this one here. Take that stuff out.
Right.
And maybe bring that down a bit. And extend it into the close-up. The close-up, it's going to be idling again, so I could either reuse that one. Let's see, my idle was here. That kind of sounds like a nice parked one, though. Let's try that. Downside of that, it's got a space at the beginning. Let's set that in. I for in, O for out. Drop that sucker in. That's a very good idle. So let's bring that down to 18-ish. That's good. When we want to copy and paste it, it's going to want to go into the first available track. So what you can do is move that down, go up to here, and still doing the same thing. Disable that, and pop it in. So I'm going to keep that going throughout because basically it's in the entire scene. And let's check and see, by soloing it, if we can hear a hiccup as it goes from clip to clip. Nah, it's okay. If it did, we could take a second out here, second out there, select it all. I'm going to make sure I'm not sliding everybody else by locking them. Slide them on back. And do a cross dissolve. Shortcut for that is Shift-D. Downside of that is you're actually doubling it for a moment, and that might sound a little weird, but turns out that that cut is just fine, pretty invisible. Okay, so we have to. We've added our key sound effects here of the guy.
Hey, what's the big idea?
Honking. The face smear on the glass. And those are just done in a similar way where I'm dropping in things and changing their level.
Hey, what's the big idea?
I raised his vocal level there. Where'd the horn go? I hear a horn.
Hey, what?
Must be on its own layer in here. Let's take a look. There it is. Yeah, sitting down there. To go to full screen like this, I hit the tilde key. Any window you want to blow up to full size, just hover over it and hit tilde. That's really a great shortcut for people who are losing their vision or have limited space on their monitor. Let's do some audio cutting for music, which has sort of its own vagaries and difficulties. I have some clips I've pulled. Here's this horror cue. You know, it's just basically tones. I don't want a crescendo. Let's just take this piece. Okay, so it's probably going to be something like that. Let's find the space for that. I'm going to start it pretty much there where the fellow is not responding.
Hey, what's the big idea?
Okay, so that change in tone is getting confusing with the horn. Maybe I want something that's more... Let's do that. A little less musical. And it's going to start in there. Just a little tension.
Hey, what's the big idea?
Okay, and that's where we'll cut to our next piece of music, which is this one. This is from the Last Man Standing soundtrack. Nice bit of sort of action-y or tension-y kind of stuff. So we're going to drop that straight on in. And here's where obvious hard cut, right? Let's have it actually kick in right about there. And maybe somewhere in here is where the transition will be happening. Let's back it up just a little bit. Again, I'm going to click on the space between it. It'll light up. Shift D creates my cross dissolve. And let's see. Actually, it kind of feels like it's almost intentional. Good enough for an animatic. We will have to mix it out to make sure that it's out of the way of the dialogue, but that's a pretty good start. And here's another clip from that same film. It just kind of sounds like 30s-y, jazzy, bluesy sorts of thing. So I'll just take a little piece of it. And it's still almost too big.
Honey, you made the right choice.
Let's drag the whole thing down a bit.
Here's an express train ticket to Big Picture.
It's out of the way. Almost sounds like source music, like it's coming from the car interior or something. And there again, we just need a little transition. Now that tension music crossfades on, and you can decide editorially where the most appropriate place for that to come in is. I might say it's a little bit later. Like, I wonder what happens if it's right there. So in that case, take your transition out, slide the cut forward. Might be worse. Yeah, I think it was better before, because we hit a nice sort of down moment in the song, and that enabled the crossfade to be less obvious. So there it is. Let's check the volume through this. This kind of music that doesn't have a beat to it or obvious instrumentation is the best kind, because it stays out of the way of sound effects and dialogue. As opposed to that kind of music where you're only going to hear the music. Like if we cut ahead here.
Saul, last chance, old man. Are you going to put out the film?
I wonder if there's a better piece of that. Let's take a look. Oh, but that crescendo there is really good, so we don't want to lose that. In fact, we might want to make sure that that's present in here. So I'm going to take that out. I'm going to squeak this on back. Open that up, and that should be a nigh invisible. Let's listen to that. Yeah, very good. You'll be surprised at how many sort of happy accidents you'll get with the music. That's why I think you don't really need to cut to music. It's going to happen automatically, and you'll imagine that the cut was created just for you. There's a magic thing that happens when music seems to sync up automatically, and we should enjoy that. Let's duck this out of the way so that the dialogue can be heard. With the pen tool, P for pen, I can click on these handles of the audio and create keyframes on it.
Saul, last chance, old man. Are you going to put out the film?
Okay, so apparently the motor is the last thing to go. It's something like that. And I'll just throw some fades on it.
Last chance, old man. Are you going to put out the film?
So there's our scene, and I can see how it plays out now.
Hey, what's the big idea? Saul, last chance, old man. Are you going to put out the film?
Let's take this one and add some weather to it. It's a cool looking shot, so maybe a little rain would snazz things up. So I've got 4 or 5 layers here, my background, my city, car. previously we had done a color correction on this, so let's do that again. Let's take some of the black out of it there. Take some of the white out too. Send it to the background a little bit. And do the same thing for this and just pinch it just a little bit so it's more obviously in the front. Okay. So what we'll do is create something called an adjustment layer. So we'll find that under Layer, New, Adjustment Layer, and it's just a transparent layer that sits on top of everything. Okay, and onto that we can apply the effects. Anything that you want to have an effect done to everything from the top down, you can put on an adjustment layer. So if we wanted to tint everything blue, we could go up here and hey, how about some blue? And now we've got tint. You can dial that in. So that's sitting on top of everything. If we just send it down, we'll see that it affects layers differently depending on where it's sitting in that stack. Let's put it back up top. Let's take that tint off, and we're going to apply something called simulation. And in this case, we've got rainfall, snowfall. You can pick one of those too, since that tends to be good. Off the rack, it's a little hard to see, so we might change the opacity. Upon doing so, we see that it's torrential, so we want to kick that back, maybe fewer, something like that. It's pretty nice. Maybe we up the size a little bit so it's more obvious. What scene depth is doing is giving us rain of different sizes and different opacities. The lower we make the scene depth, the more it will seem like a sheet in the front, and for us that might be just fine. We might find that we can bring the opacity down then again. There's some variations, including wind, and it's a little hard to see what happens when you do that, but I think it's a little too subtle. What I really want is a kind of a directional thing with it, and this particular plugin doesn't let you do much of that. Similarly, while that layer is selected, we can go to Simulation, Snowfall, and let's preview that and see what that looks like. Very subtle because they're very small. So let's crank up the opacity, let's crank up the size, let's crank down the volume of that. 500 is a little low, 5,000. And to some extent we have some more variation here. Get it a little sleetier. If you'd like it to still be chunkier, scaling up this layer doesn't do it. The effect is applied after the scale operation, so it's something that you don't have control over here. Another way to do this is to go Layer, New, Solid, and we're going to make a black solid in this case. We're going to apply the snowfall directly to this clip instead. And now we can set this layer to something like Add, and we'll be getting, I think, a little stronger effect. Let's see too if we can scale it. Yeah, now that it's not on an adjustment layer, we can scale it. We can even rotate it if we want to get a little bit more of an angle to things. So I think it's a pretty valuable trick to use a solid instead of an adjustment layer. That being said, you can also put it in depth behind things if you want. So I think the appropriate place would be somewhere in here, and or put it in several layers if you want to really make it awful. I guess it would be in front of the city. Then it would be duplicate it, stick it in front of the car, and duplicate it, stick it in front of the characters, and duplicate it, stick it in front of the gate. And obviously they would all benefit from being off in time slightly, so let's do a little bit of that. It's a wonderful life all over again. If you switch them all to screen, you can get a slightly softer effect with it. And you always, of course, have opacity too if you want to dial that in. Okay, weather.